Don't stop. Hey, baby, how did you get here? You were just in the room.
Oh, sorry, baby. My twin brother got drunk and slept on our bed. I think he is with a woman.
What?
Juno, she murmured into the dark. You're back. He didn't answer. But she felt the bed dip beside her, felt the warmth of him, and that was enough. Then he kissed her, and she woke up completely. Not because it alarmed her, but because it was nothing like she expected. It was hungry, deep and deliberate. His lips moving against hers with a certainty that made her hands fly up instinctively to grip the front of his shirt. He kissed her like a man who had been holding something back for a very long time and had finally decided to let it go. Her mind flickered briefly, Juno. But the thought dissolved just as quickly as it came. Course it was him. Who else would it be? This was their wedding night. This was their suite. She kissed him back. The night that followed was unlike anything in their 3 years together. He was aggressive in the most intoxicating way. Not careless but certain. There was a boldness in his hands, a fluency in his touch, as though he had memorized a version of her she hadn't even fully discovered herself. He moved across her skin with a kind of unhurried confidence that made her breath unravel, and she found herself thinking distantly, so this is who he becomes when the formality falls away. This is what was underneath all along. He honored her body completely. When he trailed kisses down the slope of her stomach and kept going, she went still. Juno. He didn't stop. And after a breathless, disbelieving moment, she stopped questioning it. In 3 years she had asked once, early on. He had smiled apologetically and moved on, and she had quietly closed that particular door and never mentioned it again. She had made peace with it, filed it away under things we don't do, the way every couple accumulates small adjustments and compromises. But tonight, he gave her that and more, and Adiz gripped the sheets with both fists, her head tipping back, her whole body dissolving into something warm and wordless. She told herself it was the wedding night that had changed things. The weight of the vows, the rings on their fingers, the finality of choosing each other in front of God and family. Maybe all of it had unlocked something in him. Some deep, possessive tenderness that had been waiting for exactly this moment to surface. He sees me as fully his now, she thought through the haze. That's what this is. She let herself believe it. She had no reason not to. Afterward, the room was quiet and warm. She lay nestled against his chest, skin cooling, pulse still settling, and that was when she noticed it, the smell. Faint but unmistakable. Whiskey. Rich and woody, clinging to his breath, his skin, the warmth radiating off him. Adiz frowned slightly, the smallest crease forming between her brows. Juno didn't drink. He never had. Not wine at dinners, not champagne at celebrations, not even a single beer at the many social events they had attended together. It was simply not something he did. But then again, she reasoned slowly, tonight was exceptional. Tonight was their wedding. Perhaps he had allowed himself one toast too many, carried away by the joy of the evening. It was not impossible. People surprised you. She let the thought go. What surprised her more? What made a small, wondering smile cross her face as she lay there in the dark, was what came next. Instead of rolling away and drifting off the way he always did after intimacy, he stayed. His arms remained around her, his lips close to her ear, and he began to speak. Low, unhurried whispers. Soft things. His voice tracing the curve of her shoulder, murmuring appreciation into her skin. You are so beautiful, you are so warm, I have never. The words blurred together, half heard and wholly felt, and Adiz closed her eyes and let them wash over her like something she hadn't known she was thirsty for until it arrived. She fell asleep in his arms, completely and utterly at peace. When she opened her eyes the next morning, pale gold light was pressing through the curtains and the man beside her was still asleep. He was lying on his stomach, one arm stretched across the bed. His face turned away from her. His breathing was deep and even. Adiz watched him for a moment, soft with affection, then slipped quietly from beneath the sheets. She didn't want to wake him. He looked more peaceful than she had seen him in months. all the quiet tension he carried in his jaw and shoulders completely released. She pulled on a robe, padded barefoot out of the bedroom, and made her way to the suite's kitchen. She moved through the space humming to herself, pulling out a pan, cracking eggs, finding coffee. Cooking for him on their first morning as husband and wife felt like a small ceremony in itself. She was sliding toast from the toaster when she heard the other bedroom door open. The suite had 2 rooms she had almost forgotten, and footsteps, and then, "Darling!" Dees turned. Juno was standing in the kitchen doorway in yesterday's dress shirt. His hair disheveled. His eyes creased with sleep and something else. Something that looked like a night's worth of frustration and quiet worry. "Where have you been?" he asked. His voice was gentle but tight at the edges. "I have been calling you all through the night. I woke up and you were not there." He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling. "And my brother. He had too much to drink at the reception. He mistook our room for his last night and ended up sleeping in there with, I don't know, some woman." He shook his head. "It was chaos trying to sort it out. I felt alone and I wanted you there. And you were nowhere to be found. Where did you go?" The toast in Adi's hand dropped back onto the counter. The room tilted. She stood very still, and in the silence that followed his words, the entire previous night began to reassemble itself in her mind. But this time, every piece landed differently. The hunger in that kiss. The boldness she had never felt before. The whiskey on his breath. The whiskey when Juno never drank. The way his hands had felt like almost familiar. Close enough to fool a half-sleeping woman who had no reason to question what her own mind was telling her. The things he had whispered in the dark. She hadn't been able to fully make them out, hadn't needed to, because context had already convinced her of who was speaking. "My brother mistook our room for his. He ended up sleeping in there with some woman." The egg in the pan hissed and spat. Adiz reached out slowly and turned off the stove. "I..." Her voice came out carefully, controlled, as though she were lifting something fragile. "I fell asleep in the kitchen. I came to get some water and I just drifted off. I'm sorry." Juno looked at her, then at the immaculate kitchen around her, then back at her. A small, confused line appeared between his brows. "The kitchen." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to worry you." He studied her for just a moment longer. That quiet, searching way he had. Then the concern in his face softened into something more tired than suspicious. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, pressing his lips to the top of her head. "Come back to bed," he murmured. "I missed you." She followed him. She lay down beside him, the real him, the man whose hands she knew, whose rhythms she recognized, and when he reached for her, gentle, unhurried, quiet in the way she had always known, she closed her eyes and told herself that everything was fine. It was not like the night before. It was familiar, warm, comme il faut, the way things between them had always been. He moved carefully, considerately, the way a good man does, and when it was over he pressed a single soft kiss to her temple, murmured something contented, and within minutes his breathing slowed and deepened into sleep. She lay beside him in the morning light, staring at the ceiling. The same ceiling, the same suite, the same man. And yet, her hand rested flat against her own stomach, and she breathed in, breathed out, and tried very hard not to think about what she now knew. About the warmth that lingered in her skin. About whiskey she hadn't questioned, and a boldness she had mislabeled as love unlocked by matrimony. About the brother, the twin, sleeping somewhere in this very suite. "He mistook our room," Juno had said, "and slept there with a woman." He did not know he was describing his own wife. She stared at the ceiling for a long, long time. She should not have come to the table. That was the thought that moved through Adiz's mind as she stood at the kitchen counter, arranging slices of fruit onto a plate with hands that were just slightly too deliberate, the way hands behave when they are trying to disguise the fact that they are not entirely steady. She had considered, briefly, pleading a headache, staying in the bedroom, letting Juno bring her something on a tray like a woman recovering from the previous day's celebration. But that would have looked strange. And strange was the last thing she could afford to look right now. So she carried the fruit to the table. She poured the orange juice. She smiled at her husband when he appeared from the bathroom freshly showered. His hair damp. His expression relaxed and unhurried in the way of a man who had slept soundly and had nothing on his conscience. "This looks good," Juno said, dropping a kiss on her cheek as he passed. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. She sat down. She picked up her fork. She told herself she was fine. Then the other bedroom door opened. He filled the doorway the way Juno never quite did. Not taller, not broader, but something in the way he carried himself took up more space. He was in a white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his dark hair slightly disheveled, and for one lurching moment Adi's treacherous body recognized him before her mind could intervene. A flush moved up the back of her neck. She looked down at her plate. "Hyung." Juno looked up from his coffee, gesturing toward the empty chair across the table. "Come and eat. Adi's made breakfast." "Did she?" His voice. She had heard it in the dark, low and warm, whispering things against her skin. In the daylight, around the breakfast table, with her husband sitting 2 feet to her left, it landed like a stone dropped into still water. She did not look up. She heard the scrape of the chair, the soft weight of him settling into it, and then the ordinary sounds of someone reaching for the juice, for the bread, the mundane soundtrack of a shared morning meal. Juno was talking, something about the itinerary for the day, a beach reservation he had made weeks in advance, and Adi's contributed at the right intervals, nodding, responding, performing the role of a woman who was perfectly comfortable and had absolutely nothing to hide. She was doing well. She was doing remarkably well. Then she made the mistake of looking up. He was already watching her. Juno was glancing at his phone, scrolling something, momentarily distracted, and across the table his twin was watching Adi's with a stillness that made her stomach drop. He wasn't staring aggressively. Nothing that could be called out, nothing that would catch Juno's eye if he happened to glance up. It was quieter than that. More dangerous. His elbow was rested on the table. His jaw leaned lightly against his knuckles, and there was the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth. Smirk. Private and precise, calibrated exactly for her. A smirk that said, "I know something you know, and neither of us is going to say it out loud." Adi's looked back down at her plate. She pushed a piece of mango to the edge of the ceramic and told herself to breathe. "How did everyone sleep?" Juno asked pleasantly, setting his phone face down on the table. It was the kind of polite, general question a host asks, casual, rhetorical almost. "Well enough," his brother said, reaching for a piece of toast. Then, without changing his tone in the slightest, "I hope you slept well last night, Adi's." The way he said her name. The small, intentional pause before it. She picked up her glass of orange juice and took a slow sip, using the motion to give herself exactly 3 seconds. "I did," she said, setting it down carefully. "Thank you." She did not look at him. But she felt him, the warmth of his attention across the table, steady and unhurried, like a man who had nowhere to be and all the patience in the world. Juno reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm glad one of us did. I had a terrible night without you." "I'm sorry," she said softly, turning to her husband. And she meant it. She meant it in ways she could not begin to untangle right now, at this table, with his twin sitting across from her biting his lower lip like he found the entire situation privately, profoundly amusing. She caught that, the lip bite from the corner of her eye. Just a flash. His teeth grazing his lower lip, slow and deliberate. His gaze still fixed on her. Adi's cut a piece of pineapple and chewed it and tasted absolutely nothing. Breakfast ended the way bad dreams sometimes do. Not with a dramatic conclusion but with a slow, merciful dissolve. Juno announced he was going to make a quick call to the hotel concierge about their afternoon plans. He pushed back from the table, dropped another easy kiss on Adi's head, and disappeared down the hallway with his phone already raised to his ear. She began stacking plates. She needed something to do with her hands. She needed to be efficient and domestic and completely, aggressively normal. She carried the plates to the kitchen counter and turned on the tap and began to rinse them, focusing on the sound of the water, the temperature of it against her palms. She heard his footsteps before she heard his voice. He came to stand behind her, not close enough to be improper, but close enough to be deliberate. She felt the shift in the air. Her shoulders tensed. You screamed your lungs out last night. The plate nearly slipped from her hands. She caught it, set it down in the sink, turned off the tap, gripped the edge of the counter and stood very still, her back still to him, her jaw tight. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Her voice was admirably steady. She was almost proud of it. A low sound came from behind her. Not quite a laugh. Something more controlled than that. More knowing. No. He left a pause like a signature. That's interesting. Because I remember it very clearly. She turned around then, because she refused to have this conversation with her back to him. She needed to see his face so she could properly, calmly, completely shut this down. That was a mistake too. He was leaning against the kitchen doorframe, arms loosely folded, entirely at ease, like a man who had wandered into a room with no particular agenda and found himself mildly entertained by what he discovered there. He was the image of her husband. The same dark eyes, the same jaw, the same mouth. And yet everything about the way he occupied a room was different. Some fundamental setting dialed differently from birth, some frequency Juno had never operated on. She had spent a night on that frequency. Her body remembered it without her permission. Nothing happened, she said quietly, firmly, meeting his eyes. Adiz. He said her name the same way he had at the breakfast table, with that small, deliberate pause like he was placing it carefully. You don't have to do that. Do what? Perform. He tilted his head slightly. There's no one watching. She felt the heat rise in her face and hated herself for it. I want you to understand something, she said, keeping her voice low and even. You came into the wrong room. I thought you were Juno. Nothing that happened last night was. She stopped. Recalibrated. It was a mistake. That is all it was. He looked at her for a long moment. Quiet and unreadable. Then he said, I didn't want to. She blinked. What? Last night. He unfolded his arms slowly, straightening from the doorframe. I didn't want to. When I realized, when I understood where I was. His expression shifted just slightly. Something underneath the composure, something more complicated. I tried to stop. But you. He paused, and this time the pause had a different quality to it. Less amusement. More weight. You begged me. The kitchen was very quiet. Adiz opened her mouth and then closed it. She wanted to refute it. She wanted to stand there and tell him he was wrong, that he was constructing a version of events designed to shift responsibility, to rewrite the night in a way that suited him. She wanted that to be true. But the dark had a long memory. And so, unfortunately, did she. She remembered the moment she had reached for him, half dreaming and certain, filled with champagne and wedding joy and 3 years of loving a man she believed was finally, fully opening himself to her. She remembered what she had said. She remembered how she had pulled him back when, had that been real? Had there actually been a hesitation she had interpreted as shyness, as the old familiar restraint, and answered with encouragement? The memory surfaced with an excruciating clarity she had not been prepared for. Her hands tightened at her sides. That doesn't matter, she said. Her voice had gone quieter. I know, he said. And to his credit, or perhaps to her greater distress, he didn't say it with a smirk. He said it simply. I know it doesn't change anything. I'm not saying it to, I'm not trying to. He exhaled through his nose, ran a hand briefly through his hair, and for a single unguarded moment he looked less like a man enjoying a private joke and more like a man who had not entirely slept. I had too much to drink. I didn't know where I was. And then I did know, and it was already. Stop. The word came out soft but absolute. He stopped. From down the hallway came the faint sound of Juno's voice, still on his phone, cheerful and unhurried. The sound of it moved through Adiz like cold water. She looked at the man in front of her, this precise, impossible mirror of her husband, and she understood with total clarity that the ground she was standing on had changed shape in the night, while she was sleeping, while she was dreaming of roses and new beginnings. She was standing on it still, but it was different now. And only she knew. "This conversation is over," she said quietly. "And it never happened. Do you understand me?" He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it and didn't try. Then he gave a single, slow nod. She turned back to the sink, turned the tap back on, and resumed rinsing the plates with hands that were, this time, not steady at all. She began to dread the nights. Not because they were empty. Juno was attentive, affectionate, everything a new husband was supposed to be. He reached for her in the dark with the same quiet tenderness she had always known, and she went to him, because what else could she do? She was his wife. This was her marriage. This was the life she had chosen with her whole heart not 2 weeks ago, standing in a garden full of flowers and people who loved them, speaking vows she had meant completely. But something had been rearranged inside her, and she could not put it back. It was not that she felt nothing. It was worse than that. She felt comparison, that quiet, traitorous measuring that happened beneath conscious thought, below the level where she could intercept or correct it. Juno would reach for her and her body would respond dutifully, warmly even, but somewhere underneath the warmth was a register she could not shut off, a frequency that remembered a different night and a different pair of hands and a hunger that had taken her apart completely. She hated herself for it. She began manufacturing reasons to sleep early. Headache, exhaustion from the sun, too much food at dinner sitting heavily. Juno never pushed. He was not that kind of man. And every time he simply kissed her temple and said, "Rest, my love," the guilt moved through her like something slow and corrosive. She would lie in the dark beside him, listening to him breathe, and feel the distance between them like a physical thing she had constructed and could not now dismantle. On the nights he did reach for her and she could not find an excuse. She was present with him. But she was also somewhere else. And afterward, when he fell asleep with the swift, untroubled ease of a man with a clear conscience, she lay awake and stared at the ceiling and tried to find a version of herself she recognized. She could not locate one. The nausea arrived on a Tuesday. She dismissed it at first. Stress, she told herself, the accumulated weight of a secret that had no resolution. She had not been eating well. The honeymoon suite had been replaced by their new apartment, a clean, bright space Juno had spent months preparing for her, and the business of settling into a new home was disruptive to any system. That was all it was. But the nausea did not leave on Wednesday. Or Thursday. By Friday morning she was gripping the edge of the bathroom sink with both hands, cold water running over her wrists, staring at her own reflection with an expression she did not fully recognize. Something between suspicion and the very specific dread of a woman who already knows the answer and is simply not ready to confirm it. She bought the test on a Saturday, alone, from a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away from their apartment building. She sat on the closed lid of the toilet and looked at the result for a long time. 2 lines. Clear and unambiguous, the way the worst things always are. Pregnant. The word expanded to fill the bathroom, the apartment, the entirety of the world as she currently understood it. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed carefully through her nose and did the arithmetic she had been avoiding since the moment she stood at that kitchen sink with water running cold over her shaking hands. One day. She had been with 2 men in the space of one day, one night bleeding into a morning, and now there was a child, a life, a question mark the size of the universe taking root inside her body. Modern medicine could answer the question eventually, yes, but that answer required information, and information required confession, and confession. She couldn't. She sat in the bathroom for 40 minutes before she flushed the test, washed her hands, and went to make Junho's morning coffee. She spent a week carrying it alone. A week of watching Junho hum to himself in the kitchen, of watching him call his mother, of watching him live inside a life he believed was exactly what it appeared to be. A week of calculating, of second-guessing, of lying awake at 3 a.m. doing the kind of mental spiraling that answers nothing and costs everything. And every night, without her permission, her mind went back to the honeymoon suite. She tried not to let it. She would close her eyes and command herself firmly toward sleep, toward blankness, toward anything neutral and harmless. But the dark had a way of lowering every defense she had constructed during daylight hours, and in that unguarded space the memory came, not fully formed, not narrated, but felt. The warmth of it. The certainty. The way she had been so entirely, devastatingly present in a moment she now understood had been built on a lie she hadn't even known was being told to her. She dreamed about it. She woke from those dreams with her heart going too fast and a flush across her skin that took several minutes to subside, and then she would look at her husband sleeping peacefully beside her and the shame would move through her in a slow, nauseating wave. By the end of the week, she could not carry it a single day longer. She told Junho on a Sunday evening. She had made his favorite meal, doenjang jjigae, the recipe she had learned painstakingly from his mother over a video call, the one that still didn't taste quite the way his mother made it but that he always received with enormous and genuine appreciation. She set it on the table, lit the candle in the center, and when he looked up at her with that question in his eyes, "What's the occasion?" she took a breath and sat down across from him and said, "I'm pregnant." The silence lasted approximately 1 second. Then Junho was on his feet. She had not anticipated the joy of it, or rather, she had anticipated it intellectually but had not prepared herself for the full force of it in person. He came around the table so quickly he nearly knocked his chair over, and he pulled her up and into his arms and held her with a fervency that made her eyes sting. He was saying things into her hair. "Are you serious? Are you sure? Oh my God, Adiz," and she wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face against his shoulder and let his happiness wash over her like something she did not deserve. "We have to celebrate," he said, pulling back to look at her face, his eyes bright and his smile the full, unguarded version he showed her in private. "We have to call my family. My parents, my brother." His brother. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you want." The dinner was arranged for the following evening. His parents joined by video call, his mother crying almost immediately, his father clearing his throat in the gruff, emotional way of a man who did not wish to be seen crying and was losing that particular battle. There was laughter. There was noise. There was the warm, overwhelming orchestration of a family receiving good news, and Adiz sat at the center of it and smiled until her face ached. And across the table, Junho's twin raised his glass with everyone else. He smiled. That was what she noticed first, not a smirk this time, not the private, calibrated expression she had learned to fear over breakfast. A smile. But it sat strangely on his face, loose and slightly unfocused, like a garment he had pulled on too quickly. His eyes moved to her over the rim of the glass, and he held the look for just a beat too long. Then he murmured something. Low, barely audible beneath the surrounding celebration, his lips moving around words she couldn't fully catch across the noise of the room. She didn't ask him to repeat it. She looked away. She laughed at something Junho's mother said and reached for her water glass and kept her expression warm and open and completely, expertly composed. But for the rest of the evening she felt his gaze returning to her, not aggressively, not provocatively, but with a weight that settled between her shoulder blades and stayed there like a hand she could not shake off. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark beside Junho and looked at the ceiling and did what she had been doing every night since the honeymoon. She thought about it. But tonight the thinking was different. Tonight it had a new, concrete, irreversible dimension. There was a child now. A child who was either her husband's or his twin's, and she had no way of knowing, and the not knowing was not the kind of thing that could be sustained indefinitely. Biology did not accommodate ambiguity forever. Neither, she suspected, did guilt. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. She thought about the passionate recklessness of that night. The whiskey on his breath. His hands. The way he had, even now, even in the midst of everything, her body responded to the memory in a way that horrified and bewildered her in equal measure. She thought about Junho's face when she told him. The way he had come around that table. She thought about a child growing up in this family, between these two men who looked exactly alike, and the secret she was being asked to carry by no one. By circumstance, by her own terrible luck, for possibly the rest of her life. She was still thinking when the sun began to press through the curtains. He came to her the next morning while Junho was at the gym. She was at the kitchen counter. She seemed, she thought with hollow irony, to always be at the kitchen counter when the difficult things happened, and she heard the knock at the apartment door and opened it to find him standing in the hallway, hands in the pockets of his jacket, expression unreadable in that particular way she had come to recognize as his version of deliberate composure. She stared at him. "Junho isn't here." "I know," he said. "I came to see you." She should have closed the door. She knew that, even as she stepped back and let him in. He walked into the kitchen, of course he did, and turned to face her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he looked at her with something in his eyes that was neither amusement nor cruelty, but something much more difficult to manage because it looked dangerously close to sincerity. "Does your husband know," he said quietly, "that this child might not be his?" The air left the room. "And does he know," he continued, his voice low and even and inescapable, "that you slept with me?" She told herself it was the pregnancy hormones. That was the first lie, the most convenient one, the kind that arrives pre-packaged with just enough medical plausibility to survive casual examination. She was pregnant. Her body was reorganizing itself around a new life, flooding her system with chemicals that had no interest in her dignity or her carefully constructed moral architecture. It was biology. It was circumstance. It was entirely outside her control. She told herself this on the first evening after Junho kissed her forehead, wheeled his small carry-on to the door, and said he would be back in 2 days. A supplier meeting, unavoidable, he was sorry, and that she should call his mother if she needed anything, and that he loved her. "I love you too," she said. And meant it. She closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway of their clean, bright apartment and listened to the silence settle around her like something with weight. She lasted until 9 o'clock. She could not have told anyone, afterward, exactly how the decision was made. That was the honest truth, and honesty, she was discovering, was a far more complicated thing than she had previously given it credit for. There had been no single moment of choice. No dramatic threshold she crossed with full awareness and both eyes open. Instead there had been a gradual erosion, the way water works on stone, patient and invisible until suddenly the shape of the thing has changed entirely and you are standing in a landscape you no longer recognize. She had been restless. The apartment felt too large without Junho in it, or perhaps too small, the walls pressing inward with all the thoughts she could not outrun. She tried reading. She tried a bath. She stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes eating crackers she didn't want, staring at the refrigerator door as though it owed her something. And then, without fully acknowledging what she was doing, she picked up her phone. "Are you home?" She stared at the message for a long moment after sending it. Her thumb hovered, entertaining the idea of deleting it, knowing even as the thought formed that it was already too late, not because the message had been delivered, but because she had sent it at all. The wanting had already happened. The action was merely its shadow. The reply came in under a minute. Yes. One word. No question attached, no invitation extended, no pressure applied in either direction. Just the single syllable sitting there in the blue of the thread, offering her nothing she hadn't already decided to take. She put on her shoes. He opened the door before she could knock a second time. He was in a grey shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbows, and he looked at her the way he sometimes did across rooms, with that complete, undivided stillness, as though whatever had been occupying him before simply ceased to exist the moment she appeared. He didn't look surprised. She was beginning to think he wasn't capable of it. At ease. Her name in his mouth. She had heard it from Junho's lips every day for 3 years, and it was somehow not the same word. She stood in his doorway with her hands at her sides and her jaw set and said, with full knowledge of how completely it contradicted everything about why she was standing there, "I need you to understand that this is a mistake." He stepped back to let her in. "I know," he said quietly. It was the same thing he had said in her kitchen weeks ago. "I know it doesn't change anything," and she understood now that this was the most dangerous thing about him. Not the smirk, not the private amusement he weaponized over breakfast tables. This. The moments when he simply acknowledged the truth of a thing without dressing it up or defending it. Junho would have tried to fix it, to understand it, to make everything orderly and resolved. This man simply sat with the weight of something and let it be exactly what it was. She both resented and desperately needed it. She turned to face him in the center of his living room and said what she had not planned to say, had not known she was going to say until it was already in the air between them. "Make me feel something. The way you did that night." Her voice was steady but her hands were not. That is the only reason I am here. He looked at her for a long, reading moment. One condition, he said. She waited. You promise me it stays in this room. Tonight. Only tonight. Something moved behind his eyes, complicated and unresolved, like a man negotiating privately with himself. You go back to your life. You go back to him. And this, he gestured between them, a small, contained motion. This never existed. She studied him. You're setting the terms. One of us has to. She looked at him, really looked, the way she had been carefully avoiding since the morning after the honeymoon, and saw something she had not anticipated seeing. Not desire, though that was present too. Something older and heavier than desire. Something that looked uncomfortably close to restraint. Like a man holding a very heavy thing with both hands and making no display of the effort required. He is my brother, he said. Low and simple. Whatever else I am, and I know what I am, at ease, I have no illusions about it, he is my brother. The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Then why? Because you're here. He exhaled slowly through his nose. And I am not, I stopped. On the wedding night, I stopped. You remember that. It was not a question. He held her gaze and in it she saw the confirmation of what she had buried, what she had filed under unbearable and refused to revisit. The moment she had interpreted as shyness. The hesitation she had answered with her own hands pulling him back. I am not entirely without a conscience. But I am also not a saint. The corner of his mouth moved, but it was not the smirk. It was something quieter and far more unsettling. So promise me. Tonight. And then never again. She looked up at him. I promise, she said. She meant it. He crossed the room and kissed her, and she stopped thinking entirely. It was everything the first night had been, and worse, because this time she was awake for all of it. There was no champagne to blame, no half-sleep to shelter behind, no good-faith error to wrap herself in like a coat. She was entirely present, entirely willing, entirely conscious of every single moment as it unfolded. The difference in the way he breathed, the difference in his hands, the particular and devastating fluency with which he attended to her, as though her body were a language he had been born knowing and had simply been waiting for permission to speak again. It was not gentle. It was not unkind. It was something in between those two things that she had no adequate word for, and she gave herself to it completely, because she had promised herself this was the last time and the last time deserved the full weight of her presence. She wept at one point. Briefly. Neither of them mentioned it. Afterward she lay in the dark of his room and stared at yet another ceiling. Her life had become a series of ceilings in darkened rooms, and beside her he was quiet. Not sleeping. His breathing was too measured for sleep. Don't, he said softly, into the dark. She turned her head. Don't what? Whatever you're about to do to yourself. He didn't look at her. Don't. You don't know what I'm about to do. You're about to catalogue every reason this was unforgivable. A pause. A beat of something that was not quite amusement but adjacent to it. You are very loud when you think. Despite everything, the wrongness of the ceiling, the 2 days still stretching ahead before Junho came home, the quiet particular devastation of what she had just done and chosen and meant, something loosened fractionally in her chest. Not relief. Not absolution. But something close to being seen, which was its own complicated gift. She sat up. Found her clothes. Dressed in the dark with the efficient, mechanical movements of a woman who needed to leave before she changed her mind about leaving. At the door she stopped. Her hand on the frame, her back to him. Promise me something in return, she said. Silence from behind her. Never tell him. Her voice was quiet and absolute. Not ever. Not in anger. Not in drink. Not for any reason, in any circumstance. Never. The pause stretched long enough that she felt it in her chest. Never, he said. She left. She went home and stood in the shower until the water ran cold, and then she got into her husband's bed and pulled his pillow close and held it against her chest and lay in the dark and made herself a promise she intended to keep for the rest of her life. It was the last time. She was done with him. And as she finally, exhaustedly closed her eyes, she almost, believed herself. The ultrasound technician said, "There's a second heartbeat," and the world stopped. Adiz lay on the examination table with the cold gel against her stomach, and the small screen angled toward her, and she heard the words and felt them arrive somewhere below understanding, in the body rather than the mind, landing like a stone dropped into very deep water. She watched the technician's face for some indication of whether this was good news or complicated news, and found that it was simply true news, the kind that rearranges everything simply by existing. 2 heartbeats. She called Juno from the car park, still sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off and the printed scan images on the passenger seat beside her. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the slight distraction of a man mid-task, and she said, "Juno, it's twins," and heard that distraction dissolve completely. The sound he made was not a word. It was something anterior to language, raw and overwhelmed and overjoyed, the sound a person makes when happiness exceeds the architecture available to contain it. "Twins," he repeated, as though testing the word's weight. "Adiz. Twins. 2 boys," she said. Her voice was steady. She was very proud of how steady it was. He was crying. She could hear it, the careful throat-clearing way he cried, the way he had at their wedding when she walked toward him and he had stood at the front of the aisle pressing his thumb and forefinger to the bridge of his nose with enormous, dignified concentration, trying very hard not to fall apart in front of everyone and failing quietly and completely. "Come home," she said softly. "Come home and we'll celebrate." "I'm already getting my coat," he said. 3 months later. She had learned, in the months since the honeymoon, to read the particular silence of their apartment the way a sailor reads weather. The small atmospheric shifts, the quality of the air, the way stillness could mean peace or mean something else entirely depending on what preceded it. So when she heard the front door open at 11:30 on a Thursday night, she knew before she even lifted her head from the pillow that something was wrong. It was not Junho's door. Junho had a key and a habit. He turned the handle twice before pushing, a small unconscious ritual she had memorized without trying. This was different. This was louder. Less coordinated. The sound of someone navigating a familiar space with unfamiliar difficulty. She sat up. Then she heard the second set of footsteps and Junho's voice. Low, concerned, the tone he used when he was managing something he hadn't anticipated, and she understood that the brother was here. That Junho had let him in. That whatever had brought him to their door at this hour was something Junho had decided to handle rather than turn away, because that was who her husband was. The kind of man who opened doors even when he was tired. Even when it was late. Even when his wife was in the next room, 8 months pregnant with 2 children whose paternity she carried alone like a stone sewn into the lining of her chest. She listened to them settle in the living room. She should have stayed in the bedroom. She knew that then, the same way she had known not to open his apartment door that night 3 months ago, the same way she had known, on some cellular, pre-conscious level, that the man kissing her in the dark on her wedding night was not her husband. She had a talent, she was beginning to understand, for knowing exactly what she should not do and doing it anyway. She got up. She put on her robe. She moved quietly to the bedroom door and stood behind it in the dark. At first the voices were manageable. Junho's, patient, measured, the way he spoke when he was coaxing someone back from an edge. His brother's, louder than usual, the consonants slightly loose, the particular verbal recklessness of a man who had drunk enough to temporarily misplace his filters. She couldn't make out the words yet. She pressed closer to the door. "Told you, you've had too much." "I'm fine." A pause. The soft collision of something, an elbow against the armrest, maybe, or a glass set down too hard. "I'm perfectly fine. I need to say something to you. I've been needing to say it for a long time and every time I come close a sound that might have been a laugh or might not have been. You're going to hate me." Adiz's hand found the door frame. "Hyung." Junho's voice. "Careful now. What is it? What's going on?" "I did something." The words fell out unevenly, weighted differently than ordinary sentences. "On your wedding night. I did something and I have been carrying it and I can't," a long, unsteady exhale. "I can't keep carrying it." The apartment went very quiet. Adiz stopped breathing. "What did you do?" Junho said. It was not quite a question. It was the voice of a man who had sensed the shape of something terrible approaching and was bracing for impact. I was drunk. I didn't know where I was. Junho, I genuinely did not know. I went to the wrong room. I thought it was mine, I thought. A pause. When he continued, his voice had shifted into something rawer. Less managed. But then I understood. And I should have left. I know I should have left immediately, but she thought I was you. She was half asleep and she reached for me and she said your name, and I told myself I would leave. I was going to leave. What did you do? Still not a question. Harder now. Something beneath it pulling tight. She begged me. The words came out quietly, almost gently, as though he were handling them carefully, aware of their weight. Not knowing. She didn't know, Junho. She thought I was you. And I stayed. God help me, I stayed. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. The kind that precedes irreversible things. Then Junho said, very quietly, you slept with my wife. I am sorry. I have never been more sorry for anything in my. On our wedding night. Each word arriving separately. Distinct. Like stones being placed one by one. You slept with my wife on our wedding night. Yes. Get out. Junho. Get out of my house. Still quiet. That was the thing that terrified Adiz more than shouting would have, the quietness of it. The absolute, airless control. Get out of my house right now. There's something else. His brother's voice. Low and urgent and terrible. The twins. Junho. I need you to think about the timing. The sentence didn't finish. It didn't need to. Adiz heard her husband's sharp inhale from the other side of the door and felt it in her own body like a blade. She opened the bedroom door. She didn't decide to. Her hand simply turned the handle and her body moved through it, and she was standing in the hallway, her robe drawn around her enormous stomach, her face giving away everything she had spent 8 months training it to conceal. Both men looked at her. Junho's face was, she had no word for it. She had catalogued every expression he owned over 3 years of loving him, and this was not among them. This was something new. Something she had manufactured with her silence and her choices and her midnight walks down hallways she should never have walked down, and the sight of it on his face, the precise, devastating moment when he looked at her and she saw him already knowing, was the worst thing she had ever experienced. Junho, she said. Her voice came out steadily, which surprised her. Let me explain. Did you know, he said. After. Did you know it wasn't me? She held his gaze. She owed him that much. Not until the morning. Something moved across his face. A flinch, quickly controlled. And you said nothing. I was going to. 8 months. His voice finally cracked, not loudly, barely at all, just a single hairline fracture in the control. 8 months, Adiz. You carried this for 8 months and you said nothing. I was frightened. The words felt inadequate the moment they left her mouth. I didn't know how to. Were you frightened, he said softly, when you went to his apartment while I was away? The floor dropped out from beneath her. She looked, she couldn't help it, the look went there before she could stop it, at the brother. He was sitting very still, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He did not look smug. He did not look entertained. He looked like a man sitting inside a consequence he had not fully calculated, and for one fleeting, furious moment she hated him with a totality she hadn't known she was capable of. He had promised never to tell. He had been drunk, and he had told anyway, and he had not even told the whole truth, had omitted the second night, the night she had gone to him willingly and with full consciousness and both eyes open, and she understood with cold clarity that his version had been edited. Curated. That even drunk, even confessing, he had given her a partial mercy she hadn't asked for and did not deserve. She turned back to her husband. That was a mistake, she said. Junho. I need you to hear me. Everything that happened was a mistake. The wedding night was not something I chose. I thought he was you, I would never. And the other night I was alone and frightened and not thinking clearly, and I have regretted it every single day since. Every day. What I feel for you, What I have always felt for you. Don't. The word came out sharp. Wounded. Don't tell me what you feel for me. Not right now. He looked at her, this man who remembered how she took her tea, who filled her car with fuel before long trips, who kissed her like she was something worth protecting, and the expression on his face was something she had put there. She had done this to this man. She had taken his quiet, faithful love and answered it with the worst possible thing, and looking at it directly was almost more than she could bear. Get out, he said. She blinked. Junho. I need you to leave this apartment. His voice was controlled again. Terrible in its control. I cannot look at you right now. I cannot. He stopped. Set his jaw. Please. Leave. I'm 8 months pregnant, she said quietly. I have nowhere. Call your sister. Call your mother. Call whoever you need to call. He turned away from her, presenting her with his profile, his jaw working. But I cannot have you in this apartment tonight. I cannot be in the same room as you right now. She stood very still. Then, from the sofa, his brother's voice. Low and rough. She can't be out on the street, Junho. Not like this. Not with the... You. Junho turned on him, and this time the quiet cracked open completely, and beneath it was something enormous and jagged and entirely justified. You do not get to speak in my house right now. You do not get to have an opinion in my house. Not tonight. Not about this. His brother went silent. Junho looked back at her. His eyes were dry. That was almost worse than tears would have been, the dryness of them, the discipline it must have cost him. I'm asking you to leave, he said. Please. She left. She sat in her sister's spare room that night, her back against the headboard, her hands resting on the vast, warm dome of her stomach, and she felt the children move, a ripple on one side, then a kick from the other, as though they were conducting a private conversation she wasn't privy to, and she pressed her palms flat against them and breathed. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives. 2 questions that only science could now answer. She did not sleep. Junho called 3 days later. Not to reconcile. She heard that immediately in the register of his voice, in the careful distance he maintained even through a phone line. He called to inform her, in the measured tones of a man who had spent 72 hours deciding how to proceed, that he wanted a DNA test. That he needed to know. That he could not, he said this once, quietly, and did not repeat it, he could not raise a child that was not his without knowing. He could not do it unknowingly. He was not built for that particular kind of deception, even an accidental one. Yes, she said. Whatever you need. She owed him that. She owed him everything and had nothing left to offer except compliance, so she gave him that. The results arrived on a Tuesday. She was in her sister's living room when Junho called, the twins 6 weeks old, 2 small warm weights in matching blankets in the bassinet beside her. She had named them already. Junho had been present at the birth, had stood beside her and held her hand through 20 hours of labor with the steady, faithful presence of a man who loved his children even while his marriage lay in ruins around him. He had not looked at her the way he used to. But he had been there. That was who he was. I have the results, he said. She closed her eyes. Tell me. A pause. Kang is mine. Her breath came out slowly. And Kai, his voice shifted. Fractionally. Almost imperceptibly. But she knew his voice better than any sound in the world and she heard it. Kai belongs to my brother. She opened her eyes and looked at her sons. 2 small faces, side by side, already so similar and already. She had noticed it and filed it away and refused to name it until now, already somehow different. Kang, who slept with his fist loosely curled beside his cheek, who barely cried, who watched the world with wide, patient eyes. And Kai, who arrived at every waking moment with a full-bodied urgency, whose hunger was loud and absolute, who already, 6 weeks into existence, seemed constitutionally opposed to accepting the world exactly as it presented itself to him. Calm and reserved. Bold and uncompromising. She pressed her lips together. Junho, she whispered. I need time, he said. I don't know what I am yet. Whether I'm a husband or, I don't know. I need time. I know. But Kang. His voice softened, Despite everything. Despite all of it. Kang is mine. And I am not, I will not abandon my son. I know, she said again. The line was quiet for a long moment. You should know, he said finally, his voice careful and exhausted and painfully honest, that I looked at him even before the results. I held him and I looked at him and I already love him. I love both of them, at ease. That is the part one cannot explain and cannot make stop, no matter how angry I am. A breath. That is the most inconvenient thing about me. She pressed her hand against her mouth. But I need you to understand something. His voice changed again, went somewhere harder. What you did, both times, I cannot simply, there is a process to forgiving something like this. A very long one. And I don't know yet if I am capable of it. I know. And what he said. She heard him exhale. About black women not being, he stopped. When he continued, his voice had a different quality, something like shame, something like a man confronting his own ugliest moment. I said something terrible to you. In my anger, I said something I should not have said. It was wrong. It was beneath both of us and I. A pause. I'm sorry for that. She was quiet for a moment. You were in pain. That is not an excuse. No, she agreed softly. It isn't. Another silence. Long and complicated and full of everything they had been to each other and everything they had damaged and everything that remained, stubbornly, undeniably, despite all of it. Take care of them, Junho said finally. Always, she said. He ended the call. She sat in the quiet of her sister's living room, her sons breathing softly in their bassinet, and she looked at them. Her Kang, her Kai, and she understood that the life she was now living had been built on one night's worth of darkness and her own repeated choices in the aftermath. She could not undo any of it. She could not reach back through time and stand differently in that doorway, ask a different question, make a different promise. But she could choose, starting now, to be worthy of these two small people who had arrived in the world carrying a secret that was never theirs to carry. She reached into the bassinet. She picked up both of her sons, one in each arm, and held them against her chest, and felt their warmth, and breathed. Outside, the day continued. Ordinary and indifferent and full of the long, difficult work of what came next. The divorce papers arrived on a Friday morning. There was nothing dramatic about it. No confrontation, no final terrible argument, no door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls. Just an envelope, cream-colored and ordinary, slipped through her sister's mail slot while Adiz was in the kitchen warming bottles for the twins. She heard the soft sound of it landing on the floor and something in her body knew. The way her body had always known things before her mind caught up, and she stood at the stove for a full minute before she went to pick it up. She read it standing in the hallway in her dressing gown, Kang balanced against her left shoulder, the paper held in her right hand, and she read it completely and carefully, every word. The way you read something you need to understand with absolute precision because you will not get the luxury of being surprised by it twice. Irreconcilable breakdown of the marriage. She folded it. Set it on the hallway table. Went back to the kitchen and finished warming the bottles. Then she sat down on her sister's kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and her knees drawn up, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, and she wept in a way she had not allowed herself to weep since the night she left their apartment. Since the night he had said get out in that terribly quiet voice, and she had understood that she had finally, irrevocably, broken something that could not be repaired. She wept for a long time. Her sister found her there and said nothing, which was the right thing to do. She simply lowered herself to the floor beside her and sat with her in it, the way good sisters do, not fixing, not explaining, not offering the false comfort of it will be all right, just present. Just there. A warm shoulder in the dark. What destroyed her was not what she expected to be destroyed by. She had anticipated the grief. She was not naive about grief, had known it was coming, had felt it building since the night the envelope arrived like a slow tide rising against a wall she had built of practicality and routine and the consuming business of caring for two infants. She had expected the grief and had braced for it, and when it came it was as heavy as she had calculated. What she had not calculated was the specific, surgical quality of her guilt. Because Junho had told her. He had called her, 3 weeks after she left, 3 weeks after the DNA results, and he had said something she would replay in the silent hours of many nights to come. He had said it carefully, in the measured, precise way of a man who had rehearsed it. Not because he wanted to wound her, but because he wanted her to understand exactly and completely the nature of the thing between them. "I want you to know," he had said, "that I have thought about this with as much honesty as I am capable of. And the truth, the full truth, is that I could have forgiven the wedding night." She had gone very still. "What happened on our wedding night was not your fault. You were deceived. You were in the dark. You believed, completely and reasonably, that you were with your husband." His voice was even. Careful. That would have been a terrible thing to carry. A terrible thing to discover. But it was not a betrayal you chose, and I have to believe, that I could have eventually found a way to hold that. That we could have found a way through it together. The pause that followed lasted long enough to be its own sentence. "But you went back to him, Adiz." There it was. While I was away. While I was trusting you. While I was building our life and preparing our home and believing in the marriage I thought we had, you went to his apartment. You were awake. You were conscious and sober, and you knew exactly who he was, and you went anyway. His breath came through the line, slow and deliberate, the breathing of a man maintaining his composure by an act of sustained will. You made a choice. You looked at our marriage and our child, you were pregnant with our child, and you made a choice. Junho. I'm not saying this to punish you. I need you to understand that. I'm saying it because I need you to understand why this is where we are. Not because of a mistake that happened in the dark on our wedding night, but because of a door you opened yourself, in the daylight, with your own hands. She had held the phone and said nothing because there was nothing to say. He was right. He had always had an infuriating, devastating relationship with being right. "I loved you," he said. Past tense. Quiet and final as a door being closed. "I loved you completely. And I think, in whatever way you were capable of it, you loved me too. But you went back to him. And that is the thing I cannot," he stopped. "That is the thing I cannot find a way past." He had hung up gently. That was very like him. Even at the end of his marriage, Junho Choi hung up gently. She saw the brother once, in the weeks that followed. He came to her sister's house unannounced on a grey Wednesday afternoon, and stood on the doorstep looking like a man who had rehearsed something, and upon arriving had forgotten every word of it. He was thinner than she remembered. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there before. He looked, she thought with a distant and detached clarity, like a man who had been living inside a consequence he'd had no idea would cost him this much. She stood in the doorway and did not invite him in. "I wanted to see them," he said. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Stripped of the fluency, the assurance, the particular frequency that had always made him take up more space than the room required. "The boys. I just wanted." "No," she said. He looked at her. "Not today," she said. "Not like this. Not with nothing arranged and nothing agreed." She kept her voice level. "Not cruel." She did not have the energy for cruelty. And besides, cruelty had never been her nature. "Kai has your blood. I am not going to pretend otherwise. And I am not going to keep him from you permanently. But I need you to understand something first." He waited. "You promised me," she said. "You looked me in the eye and you promised me you would never tell him. And then you got drunk and you sat in my husband's living room and you told him everything." She held his gaze. "You broke the only promise I ever asked you to make. And because of that," her voice threatened to fracture. She steadied it with an effort that cost her visibly. "Because of that, my children are growing up without their father in the same house. Because of that, my husband, a good man, the best man I have ever known, looks at me like I am someone he used to love. Because of that." He said nothing. What was there to say? "So no," she said. "Not today. When I am ready. When there are proper arrangements. When I have spoken to a lawyer and there is a structure that protects my sons." A pause. "Both of them." He nodded once. Slowly. His eyes went past her briefly toward the interior of the house, as though he might catch a glimpse of them. These two small people who had arrived in the world carrying his face in one of them and his choices in all of it. Then he looked back at her, and the expression on his face was the last thing she had expected. It was not arrogance. It was not the private amusement that had always made her feel simultaneously infuriated and, to her own great shame, seen. It was something much simpler and more difficult. It was regret. Plain and uncurated and too late. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at this man. This man who had come through a darkened doorway and changed everything. This man she had walked toward willingly, one terrible night, and handed a key she should never have offered. This man who shared a face with the person she had loved most in the world and was, in every way that mattered, someone else entirely. "I know you are," she said. She closed the door. She did not hate herself. That surprised her. She had expected self-hatred, had braced for it, had considered it perhaps a fair and appropriate tax on the choices she had made. But what arrived instead was something more complicated and ultimately more demanding than hatred. It was clarity. She saw herself clearly now. Not the version she had curated for Juno during 3 years of courtship. The careful, composed, reliable Adiz who had her feelings organized and her impulses managed. Not the version she had presented to herself. The real one. The one who had lain in a honeymoon suite beside her husband's absence and convinced herself that hunger was love unlocked. The one who had picked up a phone at 9 o'clock on a quiet night and sent one word and called it weakness when she knew, on some level she would not name, that it was choice. She saw that woman clearly. And she chose not to be finished with her. Because there were 2 boys in her sister's spare room, sleeping in their bassinet with their distinctive rhythms. Kang's fist curled loosely beside his cheek, Kai's whole body insisting on itself even in sleep, and those boys needed a mother who was honest about who she was. Not a woman wrapped in performance and management and the elaborate architecture of concealment. A woman who had made serious, consequential mistakes and was choosing, now, to face them without flinching and build something real in their aftermath. That was what she had left. It was not what she had imagined, standing in a garden full of flowers 2 years ago, speaking vows to a man who remembered how she took her tea. It was not the life she had built in her mind. It was smaller in some ways, and in other ways she was beginning to understand, sitting on kitchen floors, closing doors gently, learning the precise weight of honesty. It was more real than anything she had held before. Juno came to see the boys on Sundays. He came consistently and without fail, even in the early weeks when the grief was still too raw for either of them to manage anything but careful practicality. He would arrive at her sister's door with his quiet knock and his small bag of things for the children, something he had seen in a shop window, a soft toy, a particular brand of formula he had read about, and she would hand them over and he would sit with them for 2 hours with a tenderness so complete it made her chest ache. He did not stay long. He did not linger. He was civil to her in the particular way of a person who is working very hard at something that does not yet come naturally. But he came. Every Sunday without fail. Because Kong was his, and because she had heard him say this to his mother on the phone once. His voice carrying from the hallway. Because Kai was his brother's son, and his brother's son was, by the complicated arithmetic of this particular family, also his. She watched him with them and she thought, there he is. The man she had loved. The man she had married. The man she had answered with the worst possible version of herself. And she let herself feel it. All of it, the love and the loss and the grief and the specific unbearable tenderness of watching someone be extraordinary when they owed you nothing. And she did not look away from any of it. That was the least she could do. That was, for now, where she started. Adiz Choi, she kept the name for the boys so they would share something with her on paper, was 29 years old when her marriage ended. She had loved a good man imperfectly. She had made choices she could not unmake and carried consequences she had not anticipated and stood inside a life that looked nothing like the one she had planned and was still, somehow, standing. Her sons would grow up together. One calm and patient, given to long silences and careful observations. The image of his father in every stillness. One bold and restless and insistent, constitutionally opposed to accepting the world at its word. Already at 6 months old, the image of a man at ease was still learning how to think about without anger or grief or the complicated residue of a night she could neither regret fully nor remember without cost. She would watch them and see both men reflected back at her, the one she had loved and the one she had wanted, and the vast and unnavigable difference between those two things. And she would understand, finally and completely, what she had known in the dark of the honeymoon suite and refused to name. That fire and love are not the same thing. That hunger is not the same as home. And that the difference between those things, once you have confused them, is the kind of lesson that does not come cheap. She paid for it. And she lived.